Frederick, Colorado, August 14th, 2018. A neighbor sits beside a man whose wife and 2 daughters vanished overnight. They are watching surveillance footage from the night before, footage pulled from the neighbor's own home. The man beside him is not crying. He is not shaking. His eyes are calm. His affect is flat. The neighbor turns to the police officer standing next to him and says quietly, "He's not acting right. Something is off." That observation was correct. It just came 12 hours too late. Here is what I want you to sit with before we go any further. The man sitting on that couch, the man whose face registered nothing while investigators searched for his missing family, had already driven to an oil field at dawn, with his daughters alive in the back seat. He knew exactly where they were. He had put them there himself. And for 36 hours he performed grief so convincingly that even trained investigators initially believed him. Think about that. 36 hours. That is not a moment of panic. That is not a breakdown. That is a calculated, sustained performance. And it almost worked. So, today we are not just going to look at what Christopher Lee Watts did. We are going to look at how he did it, and more importantly, why every system surrounding this family failed to stop him before August 13th, 2018 became the worst day of their lives. Shanann Watts was 34 years old. She was 15 weeks pregnant with a son they had already named Nico Lee. Her daughters were Bella, 4 years old, and Celeste, 3. Bella was supposed to start kindergarten the following Monday. On the morning of August 13th, Shanann's closest friend, Nico Atkinson, drove to their house in Frederick after Shanann missed a prenatal appointment and stopped answering texts. That was the detail that alarmed Nicolai most. Shanann, one of the most active people on social media among the people who knew her, never went dark. Police arrived. The house was locked. Chris Watts opened the door. His daughters were not inside. His pregnant wife was not inside. Their bodies had been there 6 hours earlier. Would you have noticed something was wrong? Investigators are trained to read behavioral tells, and even they hesitated. So what does it say about how well Chris Watts had constructed his mask? To understand the answer, you have to go back to the summer of 2018, because the fractures were already visible, if anyone had known where to look. In June of that year, Shanann took Bella and Celeste to her parents' home in North Carolina. She stayed for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. She told close friends that Chris had been cold, distant, and unreachable, that he was not answering her calls, that something felt fundamentally different. What Shanann did not know, what she had no way of knowing, was that by late June, Chris Watts had begun an affair with a coworker named Nico Kessinger. He told Kessinger he was separated. He described a fresh start, a new life, while Shanann was posting birthday parties and gender reveals and summer beach trips to her 130,000 Facebook followers. Chris Watts was planning an exit that did not include divorce. Behind the social media facade, the financial picture was severe. The family carried $61,000 in unsecured debt. Their home in Frederick was in pre-foreclosure. A man drowning in a life he had decided, with chilling precision, to end. Here is the thing about covert narcissism, and this is the framework that criminal psychologist Dr. Judy Ho applied to Watts after the case. It does not present the way we expect danger to present. It does not look volatile. It does not look erratic. It looks dependable, quiet, patient. The covert narcissist constructs an elaborate exterior of warmth to mask a fundamental absence of genuine empathy. Chris Watts, by every external account, was a quiet, dependable family man, neighbor of the year, loving father. The performance held because it was built on years of practice, And now here is the question that the case forces us to ask. If a man can maintain that performance for years, across friendships, across family relationships, across 130,000 social media followers, what does it take to crack it? The answer, as it turned out, was one FBI agent, 10 hours, and a single devastating technique. On August 15, 2018, FBI Special Agent Graham Coder conducted a voluntary interview with Chris Watts at the Frederick Police Department. Coder's approach was not confrontation, and it was not raised voices or legal threats. It was patience and photographs. He asked Watts to look at photographs of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. Almost immediately, the first crack appeared. Watts said that Bella was going to start kindergarten. Past tense, not is going to. Was. The tense of a man who already knew his daughter was dead. Investigators flagged it. They kept listening. Throughout the interview, Watts spoke about himself, his feelings, his relationship, his experience. He never described what Shanann might have felt. He never wondered aloud whether the girls were scared or cold or calling for him. He never asked investigators what they were doing to find them, because he knew there was nothing to find. He knew exactly where they were. CBI agent Tammy Lee administered a polygraph examination. Watts failed. Then, investigators did something that had nothing to do with forensics. They cleared the room, and they sent in his father, Ronnie Watts, who had just flown in from North Carolina. Father and son, alone in that room for 9 minutes. 9 minutes. That was enough. Chris Watts confessed, first to his father, then to investigators. The confession that came out of that room was not the full truth. His first version was constructed on the spot. He said Shanann had smothered the girls and that he had killed her in a rage after discovering it. That story, if believed, might have positioned him as something other than a man who had planned this in advance. Investigators did not believe him. The real account came months later, in a second 5-hour prison interview. And it is worse than anything the first version suggested. He had driven to the Anadarko petroleum oil field where he worked, an hour from their home, with his daughters still alive in the back seat. Shanann's body was on the truck floor. At the field, he smothered Bella and Celeste himself. Then he forced their small bodies through the 8-inch openings of crude oil storage tanks. Let that sink in for a moment. This was not a man who snapped. This was not a crime of passion. This was a man who drove an hour with his children, who chose an oil field he knew, who executed a plan, and then drove back, and then called his wife's phone, and then stood on the porch and told a neighbor he hoped she was okay. If you have ever believed that you can read people, that you would know, this case is a direct challenge to that belief. Because everyone around Chris Watts believed they could read him, and every single one of them was wrong. On November 6, 2018, Christopher Lee Watts pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty, 5 consecutive life sentences, no possibility of parole. He will die in prison. Nicole Kessinger cooperated with investigators and was never charged. Shanann's parents, Frank and Sandy Razuchek, have spent years fighting relentless harassment by conspiracy theorists on YouTube who decided that Shanann bore some responsibility for her own murder. Nicole Atkinson, the friend who made the call that started everything, has spoken publicly about the guilt she carries for not recognizing the signs earlier. In 2020, Netflix released American Murder, The Family Next Door, built almost entirely from Shanann's own social media archive. There are over 1,000 videos of a family performing happiness, while the violence was already building beneath the surface. Watch it if you have not, because what you will see is not just a family. You will see a system, social media, community, neighbors, and friends that was designed to show people at their best, and therefore structurally incapable of showing what was happening underneath. And that brings us to the part of this case that matters beyond the Watts family. Family side, the murder of an entire family by an intimate partner, is not an anomaly. It follows documented psychological patterns. The Violence Policy Center reports that in the United States, an average of 3 women are killed by intimate partners every single day. 3 every single day. And in the majority of those cases, warning signs existed before the final act. The system around the Watts family had multiple contact points. Friends heard Shanann say something was wrong in her marriage. A neighbor reported hearing Chris yelling weeks before the murders. A financial situation severe enough to trigger pre-foreclosure. The kind of acute stress that behavioral threat assessment frameworks identify as an escalation risk factor. None of it triggered an intervention. None of it connected. Covert narcissists and individuals with antisocial personality traits do not present as obvious threats. They present as the quiet ones, the dependable ones, the ones you would never suspect. And that is exactly the vulnerability that cases like this exploit. So here is the question I want to leave you with. Not, how did Chris Watts fool everyone? That part we understand now. The real question is, what would it have taken for the system to see him coming? What behavioral framework, what financial flag, what intervention model would have changed the outcome? Because if we do not ask that question, if we treat this case as a uniquely monstrous anomaly rather than a documented pattern, then we will keep asking the same question about the next family and the one after that. On August 16, 2018, investigators found Bella and Celeste Watts at the bottom of crude oil tanks at the Anadarko Petroleum Field outside Frederick, Colorado. Nico Lee Watts, the son who was never born, was found buried with his mother in a shallow grave nearby. A neighbor saw it, a friend felt it. The warning signs were there. The system failed. The truth did not. If this case made you ask what we are really looking for when we say we trust someone, leave a comment below. Because that question matters. The issue is trust. Next time, we look at a case where investigators had the evidence in hand and chose to walk away anyway. Subscribe, because there are a lot more cases like this one. Evidence matters.